the HSR 4.2 V3 beta update just released, bringing with it a massive wave of changes for some characters and very little for some of the others. There's a lot to talk about, so let's just get straight into the summary of everything that changed in V3. Let's start with the smaller changes and then work our way up to the huge overhaul that happened to Silverwolf 999's entire kit. First off, most of the Nova Flare characters didn't get touched, so Hoyo must be pretty happy with where they're at. Firefly, Wowo, and Zila all got 0 changes. Welt, on the other hand, did not make it out of these changes entirely unscathed, but there are pros and cons to some of Welt's changes, so let's talk about it. For starters, if any of the Nova Flare characters were going to get changes, Welt was definitely at the top of the list, considering he's a standard banner character, and his current power level was very strong with the amount of debuffs he was dishing out. Personal damage aside, Welt was giving the team 40% defense red and 35% vulnerability, all at E0, with an additional 30% res pen at E6, essentially putting Cypher out of a job. On top of all of this, he also action delays the enemies, making survival much easier. So, to no one's surprise, they nerfed his damage amplification at E0. His 35% vulnerability is now gone, replaced by a damage percent buff. The way his new damage percent buff works is that it gives characters a 6% damage buff every time they attack an enemy affected by Welt's ultimate. It can stack up to 15 times, so it's 90% damage bonus when maxed out, which is really massive. But how many characters are able to attack an enemy 15 times within 2 turns? Not many. It's really only follow-up attack characters who will be able to max out this damage buff. So for most characters, this is just a nerf to Welt's general buffing capabilities at E0, which is sad to see. It was expected though. The free 35% vulnerability was pretty crazy. To make up for this, the 30% res pen that used to be attached to Welt's E6 now got moved to Welt's E4. So it's a little bit easier now to reach that super powerful Eidolon breakpoint for Welt. So for some people who only have E4 Welt, this is an overall buff. For people who were already going to have E6 Welt, it's an overall nerf for her supportive capabilities. His E6 took his old E4, which was a crit rate and crit damage increase for himself, and buffed it. So at E6, he does more damage than before, which is also nice. And that's all for the Nova Flare characters. So let's move on to the real meat and potatoes with Evanescia and Silverwolf. Starting with Evanescia. I made a video discussing some of the things I expected to change in V3 for both of these characters, and a decent amount of it came true, though not completely in the ways I was expecting. First off, with Evanescia, they did indeed nerf her attack scaling multipliers on her skill and ultimate by quite a bit. Like, these are decently hefty nerfs. In exchange, they slightly buffed the multiplier of her Elation scaling for her ultimate, but it's a fairly small compensation. One of Evanescia's strengths is her ability to be flexible in non-Elation teams, using general supports like Sparkle and RMC. And these changes certainly do seem targeted at that flexibility by making her more reliant on her Elation scaling damage, which makes her more reliant on Elation supports. While these nerfs seem really bad, I'm sure she's still going to perform fine in her best in slot teams. Still, it definitely does hurt a bit to see Hoyo targeting Evanescia's flexibility. Now, Evanescia did receive some compensation buffs. First, while her skill's damage got nerfed, it now gives her 10 certified banger stacks instead of 5, which is more energy for Evanescia. Additionally, the Fox Teacher is now considered a follow-up attack, which isn't super relevant, but it can benefit from follow-up attack buffs now, which is something I guess. It now also deals 100% physical damage in addition to its 25% elation damage, but regardless, the Fox Teacher's damage was never super relevant for Evanescia. The biggest changes for Evanescia were in her Eidolons. First off, her E1 lost its 20% res pen and instead gives 36% crit damage now, which is unfortunate. Even though Evanescia gains extra elation stat from her crit damage, thus making crit damage a very important stat for her, losing the res pen still sucks. Instead, Hoyo moved the 20% res pen to her E2, which is such a Hoyo thing to do. Additionally, they moved part of her old E6 into her E2, where she now gains 100% of the certified banger gained or lost by her allies instead of only gaining 50% of the amount, which increases Evanescia's energy generation even more. This does accomplish one of the previous complaints about Evanescia, making her E2 more enticing so that Evanescia mains have more options for their early vertical investment options. So that's nice. Lastly, Evanescia's E6 changed slightly. Instead of giving 25% Merrymake upfront, she now gains 15% Merrymake upfront, but gains an additional Merrymake for every point of certified banger she has, stacking up to 35% Merrymake overall. So it's overall a buff for higher investment Evanescias. By the way, just think of Merrymake as being true damage for Elation damage. Additionally, her certified banger stacks last an extra turn at her E6, so that's nice as well. Overall, Evanescia will be fine. I don't think the damage nerfs are as bad as you might be thinking. Her Elation scaling was already a decent portion of her damage, and in her best teams, she's still going to perform just fine. She'll be fine. Now, Silverwolf went through some major changes, so let's get into it. First of all, you can tell her playstyle completely changed just from her new base stats alone. Her base attack got completely gutted, whereas previously she relied heavily on her attack stat. Now, her most impressive base stat is actually her speed stat at 110 base speed, which is already a very good sign shine, since taking turns was previously her biggest weakness. The other major change she got was to her ultimate cost. She now only needs 60 stacks of hidden ranking, which is now renamed to hidden MMR instead of 80. As for her kit itself, the damage multiplier of her enhanced basic attack got buffed first of all. Additionally, they changed how the mechanic of her mystery boxes work in her enhanced basic attack. Also, they're now called loot boxes instead of mystery boxes. So, previously, Silverwolf needed to build up hidden ranking stacks while in her enhanced state in order to get more loot boxes. Now, she always gets 3 loot boxes no matter what, with no conditions attached to it. This is technically lower than her previous max of 4 loot boxes, but at least she can't get screwed over by only getting 2 loot boxes anymore. So there are pros and cons. Additionally, whereas she previously buffed the final damage of her enhanced basic attack's damage by 0.3% for every point of hidden MMR she had, she now requires 60 hidden MMR points to get her final damage buff, with the number starting at 15% and gaining another 15% at 120 hidden MMR points, but not going any higher than this. So, with her previous kit, she would reach a final damage buff of 18% at 60 stacks and 36% at 120 stacks. Now, she gains 15% at 60 stacks and 30% at 120 stacks. So it's overall a bit of a nerf numerically. However, perhaps the most important change is that her enhanced basic attacks now no longer get rid of all of her hidden MMR stacks after using an enhanced basic attack. She keeps all of her hidden MMR stacks throughout all of her enhanced basic attacks now, meaning she is going to consistently stack them higher and higher until her final enhanced basic attack, where she then clears her stacks after exiting her enhanced state. The fact that she can now no longer trigger 4 loot boxes during her enhanced basic attack and is always limited to 3 is also not as much of an issue due to the damage of her loot boxes getting decently buffed. This applies to the loot boxes outside of her enhanced basic attack too, the ones that are triggered whenever teammates consume skill points. So that's really nice. Seriously, the damage multiplier tripled. As for her talent, first off, Silverwolf can now hold up to 300 hidden MMR instead of only 160. Secondly, there is a completely new effect now where Silverwolf gets crit value based on her hidden MMR stacks. She gains 0.3% crit rate per hidden MMR, and if she overflows past 100% crit rate, she gains 0.6% crit damage instead. So at 100 hidden MMR, this is 30% crit rate, with no penalty for overcapping, since it would just turn into an equivalent value of crit damage instead. This means you don't necessarily need to plan your crit ratio around this in your build, since you're fine with overcapping crit rate. It's mainly just a way to ensure your build always reaches 100% crit rate in battle with no consequences, which is really nice. Lastly, her talent just states that she loses all of her hidden MMR stacks once she exits her ultimate, which is 1,000 times better than losing her hidden MMR stacks after each enhanced basic attack like she used to before. As for her Elation skills, her regular Elation skill gives 15 hidden MMR points now instead of 20, which is fine since her ultimate cost was reduced from 80 to 60 anyway. Now, her enhanced Elation skill got a massive buff in damage. First off, it went from an AoE attack to a bounce attack, already signaling that it's going to perform much better in single target compared to before. But not only that, the damage multiplier got massively buffed from 200% before to now dealing 6 bounces of 90%, which is a 540% multiplier in total. For reference, Sparksy, who is known for having the strongest Elation skill, has a 550% multiplier on her Elation skill. Yeah, this is a massive buff for Silverwolf's damage and should make it certain that she isn't just getting outclassed by main DPS Sparksy, now that their Elation skills have very similar scaling. However, if you thought all of these changes were massive for Silverwolf 999, hold your horses, because we haven't even gotten into the biggest changes for her. Silverwolf's bonus ability traces went through some major changes, most notably her first trace, which previously required you to build 4,400 attack, a massive, staggering number, in order to max out her Elation damage bonus. Well, this attack conversion has been completely scrapped. Now, Silverwolf has a speed conversion instead. This is fantastic. I previously described Silverwolf as a firefly who couldn't afford to build speed to take turns, but now she is actively being rewarded for focusing on speed above all else, since she double dips into the speed stat to buff her own Elation, just like Evanescia double dips into crit damage. This is everything Silverwolf could have possibly wanted, allowing her to take more turns without being punished in her build, and it can even scale higher than her previous attack to Elation stat conversion. Additionally, her third bonus ability now gives her 20 hidden MMR stacks every time she enters her enhanced state, instead of giving it at the start of battle, which helps her ramp up her damage in her enhanced basic attacks, since, again, she increases her damage based on her hidden MMR stacks. As for Silverwolf's Eidolons, they all got completely revamped as well. Her E1 now applies a 20% vulnerability debuff during her enhanced basic attacks, which is a much better damage increase compared to a tiny Elation buff to her loot boxes, which is what it used to be. Additionally, the hidden MMR stack refund that used to be attached to her light cone is now attached to her E1, refunding 20% of the hidden MMR after she exits her ultimate to help her build back up into her next ultimate with minimal downtime required. Her E2 also got completely reworked. None of its previous effects are even there anymore. First off, it extends all buffs on her for an extra turn, which is sort of weird since Sparksy and Yagwang's buffs aren't really tied to Silverwolf's turns, but it's cool, I guess. Secondly, for every 120 points of hidden MMR Silverwolf gets during her ultimate, she gains an extra turn, and this extra turn gains an additional usage of her enhanced basic attack. Or in other words, it doesn't cause her enhanced basic attack to lose any of its usages since she gets a free usage from this extra turn. So Silverwolf now has the classic E2 extra turn, just like Finan and Firefly, which is of course incredibly powerful. If her E2 was already one of the highest priorities for Silverwolf previously, it's an even higher priority now. Lastly, the res pen reduction from Silverwolf's old E2, where she reduces all enemies' resistances to 0, or simply inflicts 20% res shred if they were already at 0, is now on her E6, including the implanting of all weakness types. The Merrymake on her E6 was also changed, increasing the number from 25% to 40%, but now only applying to her loot boxes, meaning it no longer affects her Elation skill during the aha instant, which is fine since the larger Merrymake for her loot boxes is probably worth it, considering they're such a large part of her damage. Naturally, since Silverwolf completely changed from an attack scaling character to a speed scaling character, her light cone also changed, now replacing its attack stat stick role to instead becoming a speed stat stick. The defense ignore remained the same, and now, instead of refunding punchline stacks for her when she exits her ultimate, which was now moved to her E1, it instead gives punchline when she activates her ultimate, essentially serving to help her ramp up her damage even more. So, a lot changed for Silverwolf. Her playstyle has completely changed, building as much speed as possible, and even more so, attack has become essentially a dead stat for her. Her attack scaling gets converted to elation damage completely in her enhanced basic attack, and elation damage obviously does not scale off of attack, so you don't even need or want to build attack on Silverwolf anymore. Build whatever pieces have the most speed, or ideally, build her with defensive stats on her planar ornaments, with HP or defense on her orb and rope, and her damage will remain the exact same. Obviously, you still want a crit chest and speed boots, however. This genuinely might be the biggest changes a character has gone through in a beta. It really feels like everything about Silverwolf changed in terms of her playstyle and build, which is pretty crazy. I'll have much more in-depth thoughts on her power level as well as Evanescia's performance after personal testing, but at first glance, Silverwolf's V3 completely saved her, and Silverwolf fans should be very happy with these changes. Oh, I also should mention the minor changes Elation MC got. Their talent now grants 3 punchline instead of 2, which is nice for some extra synergy with Silverwolf, and their E6 got changed into a speed buff, which is also to synergize more with Silverwolf. They did lose their old E6, however, which is sad since EMC's old E6 launched their Elation skill every ultimate, which helped with EMC's energy generation. Overall, strange changes for EMC since they already weren't very impressive and arguably got overall nerfed in V3, even if it's nothing large, but still just weird. So yeah, those are all of the changes that occurred in V3. Silverwolf was the character who needed the most help by far, so it makes a lot of sense that all of Hoyo's attention went to her this beta. She got completely overhauled to a pretty crazy extent, and it's nice to see how far Hoyo is willing to change a character's kit in the beta when they clearly need the help. As for Evanescia, while the nerfs hurt, I think she'll be perfectly fine. It's most likely in an Axis situation where the nerfs look worse than they actually are in performance, especially in her best in slot teams, namely in Elation teams. And at the very least, her E2 got a lot better, which is going to be nice in the long run for the super dedicated Evanescia mains. But what do you think of the V3 changes? A lot happened in this beta, potentially too much to even wrap your brain around, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of the changes, especially regarding Silverwolf. Silverwolf mains, are we back? Sound off in the comments if we're so back, and like the video if you found it helpful or enjoyable at all. I'll definitely be making follow-up videos about Silverwolf and Evanescia's performances after these changes, so consider subscribing to the channel if you don't want to miss out on that. Thank you so much for watching, and with all of that said, until next time!